In October 1137, Saladin stood at the gates of Jerusalem with 60,000 Christian lives in his hands, and every commander in his army expected blood. The Crusaders had held this city for 88 years. When they took it in 1099, chroniclers recorded rivers of blood ankle-deep in the streets. Over 70,000 Muslims and Jews were slaughtered in 3 days of sanctioned massacre. Now the roles were reversed. Saladin had just annihilated the largest Christian army ever assembled in the East, at Hattin, 20,000 men destroyed in a single afternoon. The Kingdom of Jerusalem had no soldiers left, no reinforcements, no hope. His generals wanted vengeance. Islamic law permitted it. History demanded it. Instead, Saladin made a decision so unexpected that it would echo through 9 centuries of history and accidentally ignite the largest crusade Europe had ever launched. What he did in the 90 days after Hattin didn't just shock the medieval world. It created a legend that Christian chroniclers couldn't ignore. Muslim historians celebrated for generations, and modern scholars still debate today. Because the real story isn't what Saladin took after his greatest victory, it's what he chose not to do, and why that single decision changed everything that came after. But to understand that decision, we need to go back to the battle that made it possible. Back to the afternoon when an entire kingdom died. July 4th, 1187. The Horns of Hattin. The largest Crusader army ever assembled in the Holy Land is dying. 20,000 men, the entire military strength of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, knights, infantry, Templars, Hospitallers, all of them trapped on a waterless hillside under a July sun that feels like God's own punishment. They'd marched through the night. No water, no rest. Saladin's forces had burned the grass ahead of them, and now smoke chokes the air while arrows fall like black rain. King Guy of Jerusalem watches his army disintegrate. The infantry breaks first. Maddened by thirst, they abandon the knights and rush toward the Sea of Galilee glittering in the distance, a mirage of salvation 3 miles away. They never reach it. Saladin's cavalry cuts them down in waves. The knights try to charge. Once, twice, 3 times. Each charge weaker than the last. Horses collapse beneath armored men. The true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, carried into battle to guarantee divine protection, falls into Muslim hands. By afternoon, it's over. King Guy, captured. The Grand Master of the Templars, captured. Reynold of Chatillon, the man whose raids had provoked this war, executed personally by Saladin. Every Templar and Hospitaller knight, nearly 200 of them, beheaded on the field. 20,000 Crusaders, dead, dying, or in chains. And here's the detail that changes everything. There is no reserve, no second army, no garrison troops waiting in the cities. The Kingdom of Jerusalem just sent every soldier it had to Hattin, every single one. The cities are empty. The castles are unmanned. The greatest Christian kingdom in the East has, in one catastrophic afternoon, lost its entire capacity to resist. Saladin knows this, and he doesn't pause to celebrate. The Blitz begins. Most commanders would rest, consolidate, process prisoners, enjoy the victory. Saladin is already moving. Within days of Hattin, his army fragments into strike forces fanning across the kingdom. The goal isn't siege warfare. There's no one left to besiege. The goal is speed. Think of a map. Now watch the dominoes fall. July 10th, Acre, the richest port in the kingdom, surrenders without a fight. July 14th, Nablus falls. July 20th, Jaffa. Late July, Sidon, Beirut. August, Ascalon, the gateway to Egypt, capitulates after a brief siege. City after city, fortress after fortress, each one opening its gates because there's simply no one to defend them. The soldiers who would have manned these walls are rotting at Hattin or shuffling in slave columns toward Damascus. Saladin isn't conquering a kingdom, he's collecting one. The chroniclers describe it like a harvest, ripe fruit falling into waiting hands. 90 years of Crusader construction, castles, ports, fortifications, swept away in weeks. But there's one city that won't fall. One stubborn, defiant port that looks at Saladin's approaching army and says no. Tyre. Remember this name. It's about to matter more than anyone knows. Tyre sits on a narrow peninsula jutting into the Mediterranean. It's naturally defensible, almost an island. And just before Saladin's forces arrive, a ship pulls into harbor carrying a man named Conrad of Montferrat. Conrad is an Italian nobleman with a talent for war and absolutely no patience for surrender. He arrives to find the city's leaders negotiating capitulation. He throws the negotiators out. He rallies the garrison. He mans the walls. When Saladin's army appears, Conrad raises his banners and waits. Saladin tries negotiation. Refused. He tries assault. Repelled. He tries a siege. But Tyre is supplied by sea, and Saladin has no navy worth mentioning. Weeks pass. His army grows restless. The momentum that carried him through a dozen cities stalls against these walls. And here, Saladin makes his first critical decision. He abandons the siege, not forever. He'll return, he tells himself. But Jerusalem is waiting. The prize, the goal, the city that started it all. He can't waste his army's strength on one stubborn port when the holy city lies undefended. So he turns south, toward Jerusalem, toward destiny, and behind him, Tyre remains, unconquered, unbroken, a single port. It doesn't seem important. Not yet. Not with Jerusalem about to fall, but file this away, because that single port, the one city Saladin couldn't take, will undo everything he's about to achieve. September 20th, 1187, the walls of Jerusalem. Saladin's army arrives outside the holy city, 30,000 veterans, fresh from victory after victory. Cavalry that had shattered the greatest Crusader host ever assembled. Infantry blooded on a dozen sieges, engineers who had cracked fortress after fortress across the kingdom. They spread across the hills surrounding Jerusalem like a dark tide. Tents bloom in every direction. Cook fires dot the landscape at night like fallen stars. Inside the walls, chaos. Refugees from every fallen city have flooded through the gates. Women, children, the elderly, everyone who fled the advancing Muslim tide. The population has swelled beyond counting. 60,000 souls, some chroniclers claim. Maybe more. And defending them, almost no one. The knights died at Hattin. The garrisons surrendered with their cities. Jerusalem has exactly 2 knights within its walls. 2. In a city that once boasted thousands. Queen Sibylla, wife of the captured King Guy, is technically in charge. But real authority falls to a man who shouldn't even be there. Balian of Ibelin. The man who couldn't leave Balian had fought at Hattin and escaped. One of the few. He'd made it to the coast, then sent a message to Saladin requesting something remarkable. Safe passage to Jerusalem to retrieve his wife and children. Saladin, in a gesture of chivalry, granted it. One condition. Balian would spend only one night in the city. He would carry no weapons against Muslims. He would leave immediately with his family. Balian agreed. A nobleman's oath, sacred and unbreakable. But when he arrived, he found something he hadn't expected. A city without defenders, walls manned by old men and boys, streets packed with terrified refugees who had nowhere else to run, and a population that looked at this battle-hardened knight, one of the last survivors of Hattin, like he was their only hope. They begged him to stay. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, Heraclius, demanded it. You cannot leave these people to die. God will not forgive you. History will not forgive you. Balian faced an impossible choice: break his sacred oath to Saladin, the oath that had allowed him safe passage, and stay to defend a doomed city, or keep his honor and abandon 60,000 Christians to whatever fate awaited them. He sent a message to Saladin. "I cannot leave these people. I must break my word to you. I beg your understanding." And here's where Saladin does something that tells you everything about the man. He releases Balian from his oath. "Stay," Saladin responds. "Defend your people." I would expect nothing less from a man of honor. He even sends an escort to bring Balian's wife and children safely out of the city. Two enemies, bound by a code that transcends religion, respecting each other even as they prepare to fight to the death. This is the man approaching Jerusalem's walls. Remember that. Preparing for the impossible. Balian gets to work. He knights every noble boy over 16. Squires who had never seen battle suddenly carry the weight of knighthood on their shoulders. He knights the sons of merchants, men whose families had bought their way to respectability, now handed swords and told to die for their city. He knights anyone who can hold a weapon and follow orders. 60 new knights in a single ceremony. It's unprecedented, desperate, and everyone knows it won't be enough. The walls of Jerusalem are strong, Byzantine construction, reinforced over decades. But walls mean nothing without men to defend them. Balian stretches his pitiful force across the perimeter, knowing that any determined assault will punch through somewhere. He has one advantage: the city's population. 60,000 people means 60,000 hands. Women carry stones to the walls. Children run messages. Old men heat oil and water. Everyone who can stand becomes part of the defense. It's not an army. It's a city fighting for its life. And every single person inside those walls knows exactly what happens if they fail. The shadow of 1099. 88 years earlier, the first Crusaders had stood where Saladin stands now. They'd marched across a continent, survived desert and starvation and plague, lost half their number before even reaching the Holy Land. And after 5 weeks of brutal siege, they'd finally breached Jerusalem's walls. What followed became legend, the darkest kind. The massacre lasted 3 days. Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, men, women, children, slaughtered in the streets, in the mosques, in the synagogues. Chronicles describe blood running ankle-deep in the Temple Mount. Bodies piled so high that soldiers climbed over them. The great Al-Aqsa Mosque, where thousands had taken refuge, thinking surely the holy site would protect them. It didn't. The Crusaders waded through the huddled masses with sword and axe until nothing moved. 70,000 dead. Perhaps more. The numbers vary, but the horror doesn't. For 88 years, Muslims had remembered. Fathers had told sons, imams had preached vengeance, poets had written of the day Jerusalem would return to Islam, and the infidels would pay for every drop of blood spilled in 1099. Now that day has come. Saladin's army knows the history. His emirs know it. His soldiers know it. They've been waiting for this moment their entire lives. And every Christian inside those walls knows exactly what they're expecting. The question isn't whether Jerusalem will fall. The question is, what happens after? The first assault, September 26, 1187. Saladin tests the defenses. His forces probe the western walls, the same sector the first Crusaders had attacked in 1099. It's symbolic, deliberate, a message. We remember. Now you will too. The defenders hold. Barely. Arrows rain from the walls. Stones crash down on scaling ladders. Boiling liquid, water and oil mixed, pours onto soldiers attempting to climb. The assault stalls, then retreats. But Saladin isn't discouraged. He's probing, learning, finding the weak points. The next day, he shifts. His engineers begin work on the northeastern corner. The ground is different here. More vulnerable to mining. If they can dig beneath the foundations, collapse a section of wall, The defenders watch the excavation begin and feel their hope crumble. They can hold against assault. Maybe. For a while. But they cannot stop a mine. The clock runs out. September 29th. The mine is ready. Saladin's engineers have burrowed beneath the wall, shored up the tunnel with wooden beams, and packed it with combustibles. When they light the fire, the beams will burn, the tunnel will collapse, and the wall above will come down. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The fire is lit. The defenders on the wall feel the ground shudder beneath their feet. A crack appears. Then another. Stone groans against stone, a sound like the earth itself is breaking. And then, collapse. A 70-foot section of Jerusalem's wall crumbles into rubble. Saladin's army surges forward, into the breach, into the city that has haunted Muslim dreams for nearly a century. The defenders fight with the desperation of the doomed. They know there will be no mercy, no surrender. They've seen the bodies at Hattin. They know what happened to the Templars and Hospitallers, hand to hand in the rubble, sword against sword. Christians pushed back, step by bloody step. By nightfall, Saladin's banners fly from the breach. Jerusalem's fall is now inevitable. Everyone knows it. The only question left is the dying. Unless. The impossible gambit. Balian of Ibelin looks at his shattered defenses and makes a calculation. They cannot win. That much is certain. The breach cannot be retaken. More walls will fall. Within days, maybe hours, Saladin's army will pour through. And then 10-9-9, in reverse. But Balian has one card left to play. Saladin wants Jerusalem intact. He wants the holy sites. He wants the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock returned to Islam undamaged, unprofaned. He's said as much. And Balian controls what happens to those sites in the final hours. He sends a message to Saladin requesting a meeting. And in that meeting, he makes a threat that will change everything. September 30th, 1187. A tent between the lines. Two men face each other across a negotiating table. On one side, Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, commander of the largest Muslim army assembled in generations. The man who had shattered Crusader power at Hattin and conquered a kingdom in 90 days. On the other, Balian of Ibelin, a knight defending a doomed city with a handful of boys and merchants, a man who had already lost everything, his army, his king, his country. By every measure of power, this negotiation should be simple. Saladin holds all the cards. Jerusalem is breached. The defenders are broken. He could simply wait another day and take what he wants. But Balian hasn't come to surrender. He's come to threaten. The gambit. You want this city, Balian says. You want it intact. You want the mosques. You want the shrines. You want to pray where your prophet ascended to. Heaven. Saladin nods. This is true. This has always been true. Jerusalem isn't just a military objective. It's the third holiest city in Islam. Then understand what happens if you take it by force. Balian leans forward. We have 5,000 Muslim prisoners in this city. Every single one will die before you breach the inner walls. We will slaughter them in the streets while you watch. Saladin's expression doesn't change, but his commanders shift uncomfortably. The Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa, every Islamic holy site within these walls, we will burn them to the ground. We will tear them stone from stone. By the time you plant your banners on the rubble, there will be nothing left worth conquering. Silence. And our own holy sites? Balian continues. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest place in Christendom, we'll destroy that too. We'll leave you a city of ashes and corpses, 60,000 Christians who chose death over slavery, and the ruins of everything sacred to both our faiths. He sits back. That's what storm and sack will cost you. Is Jerusalem worth that price? The calculation: put yourself in Saladin's position. You've won, totally, completely. The largest Crusader army destroyed, the kingdom of Jerusalem conquered, the holy city breached. Your soldiers expect plunder. Your emirs expect revenge. 88 years of humiliation washed away in blood. Islamic law is clear. A city that resists siege forfeits mercy. The defenders chose to fight. They lost. Whatever happens next, they brought upon themselves. And yet, Saladin didn't fight this war for corpses and ashes. He fought it for Jerusalem, for the living city, the holy city, the city where Muhammad ascended to paradise. He fought to pray in Al-Aqsa, not to sift through its ruins. And he knows Balian isn't bluffing. The Christians saw what happened in 1099. They know what's waiting for them if the city falls by assault. They have nothing left to lose. Desperate people do desperate things. If Saladin storms the city, he might get his revenge. But he won't get Jerusalem. Not the Jerusalem he wants. The counteroffer. "What do you propose?" Saladin asks. Balian has thought about this carefully. He needs to give Saladin something, a way to claim victory without massacre, a way to satisfy the army's expectations without destroying everything. "Ransom," Balian says. "Let the Christians buy their freedom." The terms take shape over hours of negotiation. 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, 2 for a child. Anyone who can pay leaves freely, with whatever possessions they can carry. 40 days to arrange payment and departure. Safe passage guaranteed. But there's a problem. 60,000 people. Most of them refugees. Most of them have nothing. The arithmetic is brutal. Maybe 20,000 can afford the ransom. Maybe. That leaves 40,000 Christians who will pass from freedom into slavery when the 40 days expire. Balian pushes for more. 30,000 dinars, he offers, from the city treasury, for 7,000 of the poor who cannot pay for themselves. Saladin considers. His commanders are already unhappy. They were promised blood. They were promised plunder. Now they're being asked to accept payment for a city they already conquered? But Saladin sees further than his commanders. He sees the propaganda value. The contrast with 1099. The Christian chroniclers who will have to explain how Jerusalem fell without massacre. The legend that will spread through enemy courts. Saladin the merciful. Saladin the chivalrous. Saladin the great. He accepts. October 2nd, 1187. The terms are formalized. The surrender is complete. Jerusalem falls to Saladin without wholesale slaughter. What didn't happen, stop for a moment and consider what didn't occur. No 3-day massacre, no rivers of blood in the streets, no children put to the sword, no women violated, no elderly trampled beneath cavalry, no desecration of churches. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in Christianity, the place where Jesus was crucified and buried, remains standing. Saladin briefly considers converting it to a mosque. His advisors urge destruction. He refuses. Christian pilgrims will still come here, he reasons. Let them see our mercy. Let them know how Islam treats its enemies. No systematic slaughter of prisoners. The knights, the soldiers, the able-bodied men who could fight again, they're ransomed or enslaved, not executed. Saladin even frees some personally, including elderly and poor who touch his heart with their pleas. His brother, Al-Adil, asks for 1,000 slaves as his share of the spoils. Saladin grants it. Al-Adil immediately frees them all. The chroniclers, Christian and Muslim alike, record scene after scene of unexpected mercy. A sultan who weeps at the sight of families separated, who orders his soldiers to stop looting churches, who personally guarantees the safety of the patriarch, even as that same patriarch leaves the city loaded with golden treasures from the Holy Sepulchre. Is it perfect? No. Thousands who cannot pay their ransom pass into slavery. Families are broken apart. The poor suffer while the rich escape. The army takes its payment in human flesh, even if not in blood. But compared to 1099, compared to every expectation, every precedent, every law of medieval warfare, what happens in October 1187 is extraordinary. It's not just unusual, it's unbelievable. The contrast. Let's be explicit about what Saladin chose not to do. In 1099, the Crusaders killed an estimated 70,000 people in 3 days. Men, women, children, Muslims, Jews, anyone who wasn't Christian. The streets ran with blood. The Temple Mount was ankle-deep in bodies. Chroniclers on both sides recorded the horror. Raymond of Aguilers, a Crusader priest, described it as a just and splendid judgment of God. Ibn al-Athir, a Muslim historian, called it a wound that would never heal. For 88 years, that wound had festered. Now Saladin stands in the same place, with the same power, facing the same opportunity. History demanded blood. Religion permitted it. His own army expected it. He chose differently. And in choosing differently, he created something more powerful than any massacre could have achieved. He created a legend. The immediate aftermath. The 40 days begin. Christians stream out of Jerusalem in long columns, families carrying bundles of possessions, nobles on horseback, merchants with laden carts, the poor with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Saladin stations guards along the routes to prevent robbery. His soldiers watch the exodus with mixed emotions, relief that the campaign is over, resentment that they were denied their traditional rights of conquest. The ransomed head for the coast, for Tyre, the one port still holding out, for the ships that will carry them to Antioch, to Tripoli, to anywhere but here. Those who cannot pay have 40 days to find the money. Some are helped by wealthier Christians. Some are purchased and freed by Saladin's own officers. Some find patrons in the Muslim community who remember their own traditions of charity. And some, perhaps 15,000 total, pass into slavery when the deadline expires. It's not a perfect ending. It's not even a good ending for everyone. But it's not 1099. And that difference, that gap between expectation and reality, will reshape how the world sees this conflict. The news travels imagine you're a Christian in Europe, late autumn 1187. Rumors have been circulating for months. The Crusaders defeated, the king captured, Jerusalem under siege. And then, confirmation. Jerusalem has fallen. The holy city, the entire reason for the Crusades, is in Muslim hands. The place where Christ walked, where he died, where he rose from the dead. Gone. The shock is absolute. Pope Urban III reportedly dies from grief upon hearing the news. Historians debate this, but the story persists. His successor, Gregory VIII, issues a papal bull calling for immediate crusade. But here's the twist. The reports from Jerusalem include something unexpected, something that doesn't fit the narrative of holy war against barbaric infidels. The Muslims didn't massacre the population. The holy sites weren't destroyed. Christians were allowed to leave. Some were even treated with courtesy. Saladin, the enemy, the infidel, the Sultan of Islam, behaved with more mercy than the Crusaders had shown 88 years before. How do you process that? How do you preach holy war against a man who just demonstrated more chivalry than your own ancestors? November 1187. The courts of Europe. The messengers arrive in waves. First, the bare facts. Jerusalem fallen, kingdom destroyed, king captured. Then, the details. And the details create a problem. Christian chroniclers face an impossible task. They must explain how God allowed his holiest city to fall to the infidels. They must rally support for a new crusade. They must paint Saladin as a monster worthy of destruction. But they also have to tell the truth. And the truth is complicated. Because the reports filtering back from Jerusalem don't describe a monster. They describe something else entirely. a sultan who wept at the sight of suffering, who freed prisoners from his own purse, who protected churches instead of burning them. How do you demonize that? The chronicler's dilemma. Watch how different writers handle this problem. The Muslim historians have it easy. Ibn al-Athir, al-Isfahani, Baha al-Din, they celebrate Saladin as a champion of Islam, merciful but victorious, righteous but restrained, the perfect sultan. He purified Jerusalem of the filth of the infidels, writes one, but he did so with the justice that Islam commands. The contrast with 1099 is explicit. Look what the Christians did, the Muslim sources say. Now look what we did. Who are the real barbarians? But the Christian chroniclers? They're trapped. They can't deny what happened. Too many witnesses. Too many survivors streaming into the ports of Tyre and Antioch and Tripoli, telling stories of Saladin's unexpected mercy. So they adapt. Some focus on the slavery, the thousands who couldn't pay ransom and were carried off in chains. See, he's still a tyrant, still an infidel oppressor. Some emphasize the fall itself, God's punishment for Christian sins. The loss is catastrophic, yes, but it's our fault, not proof of Muslim virtue. And some, perhaps the most honest, simply admit what happened. Saladin showed mercy that none expected, writes one Western source. Would that our own princes had shown such restraint when Jerusalem was theirs. This last approach is dangerous. It undermines the entire theology of crusade. If the enemy is merciful, if the infidel is chivalrous, then what exactly are we fighting for? But the admission persists, spreads, becomes part of the story, and that story will outlast empires. The legend takes shape. Here's something remarkable. Within years of Jerusalem's fall, Saladin is becoming a figure of admiration in Christian Europe. Not universal admiration. He's still the enemy, still the infidel who stole the holy city. The Pope is still calling for his destruction. But alongside the hatred, something else grows. Troubadours begin singing of the noble Sultan. Stories circulate of his courtesy, his honor, his generosity to defeated foes. Knights compare him, favorably, to their own princes. By the next century, Dante will place Saladin in limbo, not hell, alongside the virtuous pagans of antiquity. Homer, Aristotle, Saladin, the highest honor a Christian poet could grant an infidel. How does this happen? How does the man who conquered Jerusalem become a hero in the civilization that lost it? The answer is October 2nd, 1187. The answer is the decision he made when he could have made a different one. Saladin didn't just capture a city that day. He captured something more valuable. The narrative. The story. The meaning of what happened. When Christian chroniclers tried to explain the fall of Jerusalem, they couldn't avoid explaining how it fell. And that explanation, repeated across generations, transformed Saladin from enemy into archetype. The chivalrous foe, the worthy adversary, the infidel who was more Christian than Christians. It's one of history's great ironies. The conquest that should have damned Saladin in Western memory ended up immortalizing him. Because mercy, it turns out, is a weapon too. But here's what everyone forgets. The legend of Saladin's mercy is real. It happened. The chroniclers recorded it. Historians have confirmed it. But legends don't win wars. And while Europe was processing the shock of Jerusalem's fall, while poets were composing ballads and popes were issuing bulls, something else was happening. Something that would undo everything Saladin had achieved. Remember Tyre? That single port Saladin couldn't take? It's still there, still holding, still defiant. And it's about to become the most important city in the Crusader world. The Third Crusade ignites. The papal bull goes out in late 1187, Audita Tremendi, upon hearing of the severe. It's a call to arms unlike any before. The Pope demands that all Christendom take up the cross. Kings must go personally. This isn't a minor expedition. This isn't a reinforcement. This is the full military might of Western Europe mobilizing for holy war. And they respond. Frederick Barbarossa, Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful monarch in Europe. 60 years old, but still formidable. He begins assembling the largest army Germany has ever sent to the east. Philip Augustus, King of France. Young, ambitious, calculating. He sees opportunity in crusade, both spiritual and political. Richard the Lionheart, King of England, the greatest warrior of his age, a man who lives for combat, for glory, for the clash of swords. He starts raising money before his father is even dead. 3 kings, 3 armies, converging on the Holy Land. This is the Third Crusade, the greatest crusade, the one that will produce legends of its own. Richard and Saladin, 2 titans circling each other across the burning landscape of Palestine. But here's the question. Where will they land? Egypt is closed. Syria is hostile. The entire coast of the former Kingdom of Jerusalem is in Saladin's hands, except for one city. The Tyre problem. Remember Conrad of Montferrat, the Italian nobleman who threw out the negotiators and manned the walls? He's still there, still holding Tyre, and now he's become the most important man in the Crusader world. Every refugee from Jerusalem, every survivor from the fallen cities, every knight who escaped Hattin, they all end up at Tyre. Conrad takes them in, organizes them, builds his garrison, and when the first ships from Europe arrive, advance parties, scouts, early volunteers, they land at Tyre too. It's the only port left, the only foothold, the seed from which everything else will grow. Saladin watches this and understands his mistake. In late 1187, he returns to Tyre, tries again to take it, launches assault after assault against Conrad's defenses. It's too late. The walls are fully manned now. The garrison is reinforced. Ships from Italy bring supplies and soldiers. Conrad has turned one desperate port into an impregnable fortress. Saladin's navy attempts a blockade. Conrad's ships sally out and destroy them in a single engagement. The Sultan's fleet burned or captured, his admiral drowned. January 1188. Saladin abandons the siege for the second and final time. Tyre stands, and with it, the Crusader presence in the Holy Land survives. The Guy problem. Now comes the second consequence of Saladin's mercy. Remember King Guy? The man who led the Crusader army to destruction at Hattin? The king who was captured, humiliated, and dragged before Saladin in chains? He's still a prisoner in Damascus. Technically. But Saladin has a decision to make. Guy is defeated, broken. His kingdom is gone, his army destroyed, his reputation ruined. He's no threat. He's barely a man anymore, just a symbol of Christian failure. But he's also a king, and kings have value. Saladin could execute him, could hold him forever, could ransom him for an enormous sum. Instead, he does something strange. He releases Guy. Spring 1188. Guy walks free after swearing an oath. He will never again take up arms against Saladin. He will leave the Holy Land. He will return to Europe and live out his days in peaceful obscurity. Guy swears the oath, kisses the Quran, promises on his immortal soul. Then he immediately breaks it. The oath breaker. Within weeks of his release, Guy is rallying supporters. He goes to Tyre, the obvious destination, the last Christian stronghold, the place where Conrad has gathered the survivors. But Conrad refuses to let him in. The gates stay closed. Conrad looks down from the walls at the king who lost the kingdom and says, essentially, "You're not welcome here. You're finished. Go away." It's a stunning humiliation. A king turned away from his own last city, but Guy doesn't give up. He can't. He has nowhere else to go, nothing else to live for. His wife Sibylla and his daughters are still with him. His few remaining loyalists expect him to do something. So he does the unthinkable. With a force of perhaps 400 men, knights, sergeants, servants, Guy marches south, away from Tyre, toward Acre. Acre, the great port, the richest city in the former kingdom, currently held by Saladin with a garrison of thousands. Guy of Lusignan, the king who lost everything, the oath-breaker, the fool of Hattin, is going to besiege a city he has no hope of taking. It's insane. It's suicidal. It's also the spark that will ignite the greatest battle of the Crusades. August 1189. The siege of Acre begins. Guy arrives outside Acre with his pitiful force and sets up camp. He doesn't attack. He can't. He doesn't have the men. He just sits there, blocking one approach to the city, waiting for reinforcements that may never come. Saladin's commanders laugh. They could sweep this fool away with a single cavalry charge. But Saladin hesitates. A siege of Acre, even an absurd, doomed siege, will attract attention. It will give European crusaders a destination, a cause, a rallying point. And Saladin is right to worry, because news of Guy's mad siege spreads across Europe, and something shifts. The crusade has a target now. Ships start arriving, not dozens, hundreds. Danes, Flemings, Germans, French, English, an endless stream of crusaders, all landing at Tyre, all marching south to join Guy's siege. By autumn, the besieging force has grown from 400 to 7,000. By winter, it's 20,000. By the time Richard the Lionheart arrives in 1191, there will be 100,000 crusaders camped around Acre, and every single one of them landed at Tyre, the port Saladin couldn't take. 1189, 1191, the siege that wouldn't end. For 2 years, Acre becomes the center of the world. It's not just a siege, it's a phenomenon. The largest concentration of military force the crusading movement has ever produced. A city of tents and trenches stretching for miles. Christians besieging Muslims while Muslims besiege Christians. Saladin's field army surrounding the Crusader camp that surrounds the city. 3 rings of war, constant skirmishing, disease, starvation, sorties and counter-sorties, the dead piling up faster than they can be buried. And through it all, ships keep arriving from Europe. Every week, every month, more crusaders, more knights, more infantry, more siege equipment. The trickle becomes a flood. Tyre's harbor works around the clock, processing the greatest military reinforcement in medieval history. Saladin watches his advantage evaporate. At Hattin, he destroyed 20,000 crusaders. Now 100,000 more have arrived to replace them. The kingdom he conquered in 90 days is being contested yard by bloody yard. And then Richard comes, June 1191. The Lionheart arrives. Richard the Froe of England, 33 years old, 6 feet tall, a giant by medieval standards, red gold hair, arms that can swing a sword for hours without tiring, a tactical genius with a reputation that precedes him like thunder before lightning. He lands at Acre with 17,000 English troops and immediately takes command. The siege has been grinding for 2 years. The defenders are starving. The walls are crumbling. But the Crusaders are exhausted too. Disease has killed more men than combat, and morale is shattered. Richard changes everything. He brings energy, focus, resources. His sappers dig with renewed fury. His siege engines pound the walls day and night. His presence alone transforms the army's spirit. July 12, 1191. Acre falls. The garrison surrenders. After 2 years, 100,000 casualties, and more suffering than any siege in living memory, the Crusaders have their first victory. But what happens next reveals the limits of chivalry. The massacre at Acre Saladin, and Richard negotiate for the garrison's release. The terms, 200,000 dinars, 1,500 Christian prisoners freed, the true cross returned. The deadline approaches. Saladin stalls, or moves too slowly, or genuinely cannot gather the resources in time. Historians still debate what happened. Richard doesn't care about excuses. August 20th, 1191. He marches 2,700 Muslim prisoners, the entire Acre garrison and their families, to a hill outside the city, in full view of Saladin's army, and executes them all. Men, women, children, beheaded or stabbed or clubbed to death over the course of an afternoon. Saladin's soldiers watch helplessly from the hills, too far away to intervene. It's a message. This is what happens when you make Richard wait. The chivalry that Saladin showed at Jerusalem? Richard answers it with calculated brutality. And the contrast echoes through history. 4 years after Saladin's mercy, 4 years after the decision that shocked the Crusades, Richard demonstrates exactly what normal medieval warfare looks like. Suddenly, October 1187 seems even more extraordinary. The long stalemate. For the next year, Richard and Saladin circle each other. Richard marches south along the coast. Saladin shadows him, looking for weakness. They clash at Arsuf, a Crusader victory that proves Richard's army can beat Saladin's in open battle. But Richard can't take Jerusalem. Twice he marches toward the holy city. Twice he turns back. The problem isn't military, it's strategic. Even if Richard storms Jerusalem, he can't hold it. His army will return to Europe eventually. The moment they leave, Saladin will reclaim the city. Jerusalem without a kingdom to defend it is just a symbol, a trophy, not worth the lives it would cost to take. Saladin knows this. Richard knows this. And so they negotiate. September 1192, the Treaty of Jaffa. The terms are almost absurd given the scale of the conflict. The Christians keep a thin strip of coast, Acre to Jaffa, a rump kingdom, a shadow of what existed before Hattin. Jerusalem stays in Muslim hands. But Christian pilgrims can visit freely. They can pray at the Holy Sepulchre. They can walk where Jesus walked. It's a compromise that satisfies no one completely. But it's peace. Richard sails home. Saladin returns to Damascus. And 5 months later, Saladin is dead. March 4th, 1193. Damascus. Saladin dies of fever at 55, worn out by decades of warfare, exhausted by the effort of holding his empire together against enemies within and without. The chroniclers record his final hours. He had given away so much, to soldiers, to the poor, to anyone who asked, that his treasury couldn't afford a proper funeral. They had to borrow money to bury him. Is this true? Probably not entirely. But the story persists because it fits the legend. Saladin the generous, Saladin the merciful, Saladin who cared more about honor than wealth. He's buried in Damascus, in a simple tomb beside the Umayyad Mosque. It's still there today. Visitors still come, Muslim and Christian and Jewish and secular, to pay respects to a man who died 8 centuries ago. How many medieval warlords can say that? How many conquerors are remembered not for what they took, but for what they chose not to take? The paradox. Let's be honest about what happened. Saladin won. Hattin was a complete victory. Jerusalem was recaptured. The Crusader kingdom was destroyed. For a brief, shining moment in 1187, it seemed like the Crusades might actually be over. But Saladin also lost. Tyre held. Guy was released. The Third Crusade arrived. And when the dust settled, there was still a Crusader kingdom on the coast of Palestine. Smaller, yes. Weaker, certainly. But alive. That kingdom would survive for another century, until 1291, when Acre finally falls to the Mamluks. 100 years of Christian presence that Saladin's conquests failed to erase. So what do we make of his decision at Jerusalem? The question that won't die. Historians have debated this for centuries. One school says Saladin made a strategic mistake. He should have crushed Tyre when he had the chance. He should have executed Guy instead of releasing him. He should have been ruthless, the way successful conquerors usually are. Mercy is a luxury in war. Saladin could afford it at Jerusalem because the city was already his. But showing mercy to Tyre? To Guy? That was weakness disguised as virtue. Another school disagrees. Saladin wasn't trying to exterminate the Crusaders. He was trying to delegitimize them, to prove that Islam could be both victorious and just, to win the propaganda war that mattered more than any siege. And by that measure, he succeeded completely. The legend of Saladin's mercy spread farther than his armies ever could. It shaped how Muslims saw themselves. It shaped how Christians saw their enemies. It created an ideal of Islamic chivalry that persists to this day. Which legacy matters more? The kingdom that survived, or the story that endured? What survives? Here's what's remarkable. Ask anyone today about the Crusades, and they'll probably mention Saladin, not Guy of Lusignan, not Conrad of Montferrat. Not even Richard the Lionheart gets as much recognition in the popular imagination. Saladin, the man who took Jerusalem without massacre, the Sultan who matched wits with Richard, the Muslim general who earned respect from his enemies. When the German Kaiser Wilhelm II visited Damascus in 1898, he laid a wreath on Saladin's tomb. When Hollywood makes crusade movies, Saladin is portrayed sympathetically. When modern politicians invoke the Crusades, they invoke Saladin as the counterexample, the proof that holy war doesn't require holy slaughter. This isn't an accident. This is October 2nd, 1187, echoing across the centuries. A single decision, a single moment of restraint, a choice that defied every expectation, every precedent, every demand of medieval warfare. It didn't save his empire. It didn't prevent the Third Crusade. It didn't keep the Crusader states from surviving another 100 years. But it saved something else. It saved his name. The final truth. Saladin won the battle. He won the city. He won the legend. But the Crusader states survived, because mercy in war is never simple. The port he couldn't take became the seed of his enemy's resurrection. The king he released broke his oath and sparked the greatest siege of the age. The pilgrims he allowed to pass carried stories of his virtue back to the courts that were arming against him. Every act of mercy had consequences. Every decision rippled outward in ways he couldn't predict. And yet. When we remember Saladin today, we don't remember the strategic miscalculations. We don't remember Tyre or Guy or the stalemate with Richard. We remember October 1187. We remember a man who could have chosen vengeance and chose something else. We remember the decision that shocked the Crusades. The decision that proved you could conquer a city without losing your soul. Maybe that's the real victory. Maybe that's what lasts. Not the kingdoms we build or the battles we win. Not the territories we conquer or the enemies we destroy, but the choices we make when no one would blame us for choosing differently. Saladin stood at the gates of Jerusalem with 60,000 Christian lives in his hands. His generals wanted blood. History demanded it. He chose mercy. And 9 centuries later, we're still talking about it.